everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hong Kong Horror. I'm your narrator, Simon. Tonight, we're heading over to Thailand to cover a pretty creepy story that was sent in by a long-time viewer. Let's call her Mina. It's a story that will give you a lot to think about the next time you go apartment hunting. Going for an in-person viewing will give you a good idea and feel of the apartment, but you won't know everything about the property's past. After the story, as always, let's break everything down together from a Chinese cultural perspective to see if we can figure out exactly what happened here. So let's turn on the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive right into Mina's experience. This incident happened to Mina a couple of years ago. She was in her late 20s, a young professional living in Thailand. She had just landed a job in Bangkok, which she was excited about. For the first few months, Mina tried to endure the commute. At the time, she had about a 45-minute to an hour commute to the new office. It wasn't terrible, but it sucked to have to get up extra early every morning just to get to work on time. She often had to work late too, so by the time she finished work, fought her way through the suffocating crowds at the subway station, and by the time she finally got home, it was usually well past 10 p.m. already. The daily grind was starting to become brutal. She was already exhausted from work, but having to deal with this commute and transfers afterwards made it 10 times worse. After a few months of this, Mina finally made the decision that she needed to find an apartment closer to the office. Since Mina was pretty new to her job still, she didn't want to get too nice of an apartment, just in case something happens to her job. She still wanted to be able to save some money and not spend everything she made on rent. To avoid exorbitant agency fees, Mina decided to go directly to the buildings herself to see if she could find any units for rent. On weekends, she would walk into lobbies of older high-rises. She would approach the security desks and building management offices directly to see if there were any units available for rent. One humid Sunday afternoon, Mina came across an old residential block. It wasn't one of those fancy new high-rises. It was a bit older and not as nice, but it was only a 5-minute walk to the nearest subway station. The location was perfect. Mina walked into the dimly lit lobby and approached the security guard on duty at the counter. "Excuse me," Mina asked the middle-aged man sitting behind the desk. "I'm looking to rent. Would you happen to know if this building has any vacant units?" The security guard looked up at Mina and shook his head. "Sorry, young lady. I have no idea. I just work security here." As Mina nodded understandably, ready to leave, the elevator door opened up with a ding, and a middle-aged man stepped out. That's when the security guard said, "Wait, ma'am, you should go and speak with that man over there that just came out of the elevator. His name's Henry. He's the owner of a few of the units here." Mina thanked the security guard and went over to talk to this man and ask him the same questions regarding availability. Henry looked at Mina surprised. "Why, as a matter of fact, I do. I own a few of the units in this building, and one of my tenants just moved out recently. I actually just came by today to make sure that the unit was properly cleaned after the last tenant's departure." Mina and Henry spent a couple of minutes discussing what she was looking for and the price. To Mina's surprise, this man seemed eager to rent out this unit as soon as possible. He even agreed to give her a pretty attractive discount. This discount made Mina's ears perk up. This was the break she had been praying for. Henry even told her that he could show her the unit right now if she had the time. Excited now, Mina agreed right away. Henry pushed the up button again on the elevators that he had just come out from. He then pressed the button for floor 12A. In this building, there was no 13th floor. There was a 12th floor and a 12A, but in reality, 12A is floor 13. But some buildings in Thailand try to skip the 13th floor because the number 13 is considered bad luck, largely due to adopted Western superstitions. The doors opened, revealing a long, dark corridor. The lights were off, because it had those automatic lights that turn on only when it senses movement. The floors were marbled patterned tiles. As they walked down the hall, the lights flickered on one by one. Henry led Mina to the very end of the hall. Unit 7. It was a corner unit, located directly next to the heavy steel door of the emergency fire stairs. So, I own both of these units, 6 and 7. I'll show you Unit 7 first, to see what you think. If you don't like it, we can look at Unit 6 also, Henry said. When he opened the front door, Mina was actually pretty shocked. The apartment was beautiful. It looked nothing like the outside. Everything in the unit looked super new. It came furnished. The furniture was modern and looked new. It even had a balcony with a sweeping view of the city. Mina was ecstatic. She immediately told Henry that she loved it. And for the price that Henry was willing to rent it to Mina for, this was a no-brainer. She agreed to sign the lease right away. It took her a few days to sort out the deposit and paperwork, but by the next weekend, Mina had already moved everything she had from her old place over into Unit 7. She felt incredibly lucky to have bumped into Henry when she did. What a steal, she thought. The first week in the new apartment was absolute bliss. Mina's commute was cut down to about 15 minutes now, walking. Sometimes she took the train, but most of the time she just walked when it was nice out, so her quality of life skyrocketed. No more exhausting morning commutes. After work, she could stroll down the street and be home before she knew it. The apartment itself was super quiet. There were no noisy neighbors, and the unit itself was high enough where she couldn't hear the traffic sounds below. She loved it. But soon, things started to change. During Mina's second week there, one Friday night, she was sitting in her living room watching a movie by herself. It was a rainy night, so she decided to take it easy and just chill out after a long week of work. She fell asleep during the movie. The clock on her wall ticked over to 3 a.m. Suddenly, Mina was awoken by a strange sound. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to wake Mina from her nap. She opened her eyes. The movie she was watching on Netflix had already finished, so it was just idling on the home screen. Mina wiped the drool on the edge of her mouth. It was a great nap. She looked around to see where the strange noise was coming from. It sounded like heavy footsteps in the hallway by her front door. Mina glanced over at her front door. The footstep sounds were coming from the outside, pacing aimlessly, back and forth, strictly between her unit and the neighboring unit. Thud, thud, thud. After a few more minutes, the sounds faded. Mina went over to her front door and looked out the peephole. It was just darkness. There was no one out there. Strange, she thought. It was probably just one of the neighbors coming home from Friday night drinks. She shrugged it off and went to bed. The next couple of nights went by uneventfully, but then a few nights later, on a random Thursday night, Mina had gone to bed early since she still had to work the next day. At around 3 a.m., she was jolted awake by a loud bang. The noise seemed to come from the hallway. It sounded like someone was banging on the front door next door. Mina sat upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She waited in the dark, barely breathing, as her brain was still trying to wake up. She tried to process what it could be, and figured that the neighbor must have dropped something. As she was laying back down to go back to sleep again, all of a sudden, another bang, 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 bang. Frustrated and pissed, Mina got out of bed. She walked barefoot to her front door and pressed her eye against the peephole again. The hallway was once again empty and dark. Nothing. What the heck are they doing next door so late on a weeknight? Mina thought. She slipped on her slippers and opened the front door. The hallway light turned on from her movements. She stormed over to Unit 6 to see what the heck was going on over there before she stopped in her tracks. Standing right outside Unit 6 was a woman. This woman didn't look at Mina and was focused on banging on the front door. Excuse me, ma'am. Do you live here in Unit 6? What's going on? I was wondering if you could please keep it down. I have to wake up early for work tomorrow, and all your banging around is really disturbing my sleep. The woman slowly turned and stared at Mina for a couple of seconds without saying a word. Then, she apologized. This woman was wearing work attire, like she worked in an office or something, which Mina thought was a bit strange. Did she just get home from work this late? She also looked drenched. It must be raining outside. The woman spoke. I'm so sorry for the disturbance. I lost my keys, and I was just trying to get back inside. I'm sorry about that. Mina, softening up a bit now that she's received an apology, didn't expect this either. Oh, okay, that's fine. But please, just keep it down. Have a good night. If you need help, you should call Henry. He's usually pretty good with answering. Mina gave her a little goodbye wave and walked back to her own unit. Before going back inside, she gave Unit 6 one last look. The woman was still staring at Mina. The next day, as Mina was coming home from work, excited to start her weekend, she was starting to forget about everything that happened last night already. That is, until she was waiting for her elevator in her apartment lobby. The elevators opened up, and out came Henry with a family. He thanked the family for their time and said goodbye to them as they left the lobby. He then made eye contact with Mina. Hey, Henry, what are you doing here? Mina asked cheerfully. That's when she thought about the tenant that was locked out last night. So, did you have to end up coming over last night to let your tenant in for Unit 6? She asked. Henry, who was cheerful at first, stopped smiling, and a wave of confusion washed over his face. Unit 6? What do you mean? He asked. Mina explained. Unit 6, you know, the unit next to mine. I saw the tenant last night coming home from work really late, and she was locked out and banging on the door. Did she ever call you? Henry stood there for a few seconds, the color draining from his face. Mina, I was just showing Unit 6 to that family that left just now. Unit 6 is not rented out. Remember? When you were here for your viewing, I mentioned that you could see Unit 6 after Unit 7 if you didn't like Unit 7. But you loved the unit right away, so I didn't push you. But 6 is still available. Mina stood there, completely stunned. How could that be? She saw and spoke with this woman who clearly said she was locked out last night around 3 a.m. She was half asleep when it happened, but she wasn't hallucinating. They had a whole conversation. No, Henry, I honestly spoke with a woman who claimed that she lived there and was trying to get inside. Are you telling me that someone was trying to break into an empty apartment unit last night? Henry and Mina decided to go to the management office to check the CCTV footage. The security guard helped them pull up the tapes between 3 and 4 a.m. And sure enough, there was Mina coming out of her unit in her pajamas and slippers as the hallway lights lit up from her movement as she stormed her way over to Unit 6. In the footage, Mina saw and recounted everything that happened last night with accuracy. But the strangest thing was that there was no woman in this footage. Mina could see herself talking in the grainy footage as she was standing there outside of Unit 6, clearly talking to someone, but there was nobody there. Based on the footage, she was talking to herself. Henry's face went pale, and he wouldn't look Mina in the eye. He was hiding something. This whole situation freaked Mina out, and she was already planning to move out already. But soon afterward, her company went bankrupt, and she was out of a job, so that was the final push she needed to leave. Luckily, she didn't have to stay much longer, because she was absolutely terrified after seeing that camera footage. Nothing else happened to her during her remaining time there, but she learned afterwards the truth behind the building and the unit next to hers that Henry never shared with her. Mina wasn't the first tenant to see the strange woman at night. Unit 6 was originally rented to a young woman, a young working professional like Mina. One rainy night, after an office happy hour, she came home late and drunk. When she reached her unit, she realized she lost her keys, and she didn't want to bother calling Henry and having to wait for him to come open the door for her. Drunk, and desperate to get inside so that she could go to bed, she opened the fire escape window in the hallway because that window juts out close to the balcony of Unit 7, which was Mina's unit. From the window, she was able to climb onto Mina's balcony, and her plan was to climb from that balcony onto her own balcony and then go inside that way. But as she was drunkenly climbing over the balcony, she slipped and she fell to her death. Other tenants before Mina have claimed that they have actually seen this woman on the balcony on rainy nights, climbing over, and some even saw her fall. But when they panicked and looked down, there was no body down there. So, Hong Kong horror family, what do you think happened here? Please, pause the video here and let me know what you think in the comments below. Now, what do I think happened here from a Chinese cultural perspective? This is a super tragic and sad situation. I believe this woman that Mina saw is most likely something we call a Yao Wan, a wandering soul, also known as a Gu Wan Ye Guai, which means a lonely wandering ghost. These are spirits that fail to properly move on after death. In my culture, death should involve a few things for the soul to fully transition to the next phase of existence. These usually include the body being recovered, ancestral offerings, and the soul understanding it's died. These will help the spirit transition peacefully into the afterlife, but sudden traumatic deaths usually interrupts this process, especially if the death involved emotions like shock or confusion, such as this woman's death. She most likely had a ton of different emotions going on at the same time. First of all, she was drunk. She was also exhausted. Also, she probably panicked during her fatal fall. The final emotional state before death matters a lot. A person who dies peacefully is believed to produce a calmer spiritual energy, but a person who dies suddenly, like this woman, usually leaves behind some sort of energy. The most common are Yunhei, resentment energy, Zapnim, obsessive attachment energy, or Yamhei, yin spiritual energy. Any one of these can anchor a spirit to the location of death, and I think that's exactly what happened to this female spirit. The haunting is pretty specific in the story, where the female spirit isn't roaming about the building, haunting random units. She seems to be repeating things specific to her unit. She's doing something called looping, where she's replaying a scenario from life over and over again. In this woman's case, she's repeating the incident of returning home late at night, trying to get into her own unit. This is just the first part of the loop that Mina witnessed, though Mina doesn't witness this female spirit completing the other half of her loop, where she climbs on the balcony and then falls off. Others have seen this, which leads me to believe that the spirit is reliving the whole incident leading up to her own death. Now, this situation is very close to something we've covered in the past, called residual hauntings. But I don't believe this is a true residual haunting, and it fits more into the category of a loop haunting. Residual hauntings and loop hauntings are actually very similar if you look at it from the surface. Both involve the spirit repeating and replaying the same actions over and over again. But there's something that happens here that stands out to me, where this female spirit does not behave like what we would typically classify as a residual haunting. A residual haunting is often compared to a recording. Spirits that are in residual hauntings do not acknowledge a person walking into the scene as it plays out. It's as if this replay has been imprinted onto the environment and replaced mechanically. There's no awareness behind it. In Mina's story, this is not the case. She actually interacted with this female spirit. The woman responded appropriately to Mina's questions. She explained that she had lost her keys, and it seems to me like she fully understood the context of the conversation. That level of interaction suggests to me some degree of consciousness. Now, the interesting thing here is that though the spirit shows aspects of having consciousness, she doesn't seem to act like a fully aware spirit either. If she was totally self-aware, she might have asked who Mina was, or asked her for help. She might have reacted to the fact that a lot of time had already passed since her death. Yet, her entire awareness seems confined to one specific situation, which was that she lost her keys, and that she was trying to find a way back into her unit. This is actually not too surprising though. Do you know why that is? This woman's final moments were entirely centered around one goal, which was to get back inside her home. She was tired after work, drunk, and lost her keys, so she desperately wanted to just go home. Everything on her mind, right before death, was focused on solving this one problem. Then, she died. Death interrupted the completion of that intention, resulting in her consciousness never progressing beyond that point. So this woman isn't repeating this event because she wants to, but it's more so that from her perspective, it never really ended. This concept appears repeatedly in a lot of Chinese ghost stories. These types of spirits are trapped in a state of mind more so than the actual location itself. This leads me into my next point. I don't think the spirit realizes that she's dead. This is another really common belief in Asian ghost stories. The traditional idea is that spirits who've died too suddenly, too violently, or too emotionally overwhelmed don't always realize they have died. So, if you ever come across a similar situation where a spirit is looping, chances are, the spirit you're seeing most likely doesn't realize they've already died. The underlying assumption is that death is not always experienced as an instantaneous transition. In many folk traditions, particularly those influenced by Buddhism or Taoism, consciousness does not necessarily go from alive to fully aware spirit in a single moment. If death occurs under certain circumstances, the person's awareness may become confused, fragmented, or even fixated on whatever was occupying their mind immediately before death. In fact, some traditional interpretations would suggest that these types of spirits may not even experience time the same way we do as living people. So imagine watching a movie and pausing it at a particular scene. You can leave it paused there for a long time. Years could pass in the outside world, but the characters inside that frame would never experience the passage of time like we do. Many believe that time flows in a similar way for these spirits. The physical world continues moving forward, but the spirit remains psychologically anchored to that emotional reality of the moment it died. To the spirit, in Mina's story, she was honestly still trying to go home. She was still soaked from the rain from that night. She was still wearing the same work clothes she wore to work that day. The years that have passed since her death simply don't exist within her awareness. Stories like this are more common than you would think. Many Chinese ghost stories contain the same heartbreaking theme where the dead continue performing the routines of life that they are used to, not understanding that their life has already ended. They will continue to commute to work, look for family members, or try to finish a task. They're continuing to attempt to participate in a reality that no longer exists. To better understand this concept, think of it this way. Instead of seeing Mina's experience as a haunting, view it more as a brief collision between two different states of existence. So from Mina's point of view, she saw a woman standing in the hallway, in the present. This woman may have believed she was standing in the same hallway years earlier, still trying to get home after working, completely unaware that she never made it inside. I think that the most heartbreaking part of this story is the idea that a person can become so trapped by a final moment that they never realize the rest of the world has already moved on without them. Now, a lot of you have asked me in other episodes during the breakdowns if these types of spirits can be saved. Well, that depends. The answer would generally be yes, they can be helped, but the process depends on why they were trapped in the first place. If a spirit is trapped because it doesn't realize it's dead, or because they are bound by obsessive attachment or some other type of attachment, then the goal is often not to fight it or banish it, but to help it move on. In many folk beliefs, a spirit remains because something is incomplete. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's ritual, and sometimes it's karmic. In the case of Mina's story, a traditional interpretation might be that this woman is trapped by the unfinished act of trying to get home. She died while desperately attempting to solve a problem, and her consciousness became anchored to the final intention. If that is truly what happened, then many Chinese traditions would argue that the spirit needs to somehow recognize that the journey is over. This is where Taoist and Buddhist approaches differ slightly. A Taoist practitioner might perform rituals intended to communicate with the spirit, identify its identity, and guide it toward departure. In Chinese communities, these ceremonies are often called jiudou, which means guiding or ferrying a spirit onward. The idea is not simply make the ghost disappear. It's to help them find the road they lost. There's an old belief that some spirits are not malicious at all. They're simply confused. A Taoist ritual may symbolically inform the spirit that it's died, offer it spiritual provisions, and direct it toward the next stage of existence. A Buddhist interpretation often focuses more on compassion and release from attachment. If a spirit remains because of zapnim, then prayers, reciting sutras, merit-making, and dedication of good deeds may be performed on its behalf. The hope is that the spirit will gradually let go of its attachment, keeping it bound. This is why in many Chinese ghost stories, family members often burn offerings and perform memorial rites even years after a death. The rituals are not only for remembering the dead, they are also intended to help the dead continue their journey. The spirit in Mina's story is not malicious. She's not angry or vengeful, so she's not a resentful spirit, but rather just a confused spirit. These types of spirits are much easier to help than resentful or malicious ones. If a spirit was truly nothing more than a residual imprint like a recording, there would be no one there to save. It would simply be an energetic echo. But if the woman is actually aware, even partially aware, then there's still a soul involved. And if there's a soul, there's a possibility of guidance. The sad part is, many ghost stories end before anyone attempts such help. The living become scared, move away, and leave the spirit behind. The greatest tragedy is not the haunting itself, it's that the spirit may remain trapped there in the same moment for years, decades, or even longer, still trying to complete a task that ended the night they died. Thank you, Hong Kong horror family, for making it to the end of this video. Until we speak again next week, stay safe and good night.